people. Thank you for being here today. So listen, sometimes things can seem complicated, and we honestly just wish that someone would simply, simplify things for us. That, my friends, is what this series is all about. Simplifying things in the area of our faith. Now, the first thing I want to do is clarify some terms that you may hear throughout this series. Some of you may know these terms already, but I just want to be clear when we talk about them. And the first one is Christianity. As you probably know, Christianity is a religion. For those of us in church, it's our religion. Now, the second word is Christ. Christ is another name for Jesus. So Christianity is basically the Jesus religion. Now, the third term is Christians. Now, this word has become a little complicated lately, but for the past 2,000 years, it's been the title for people who follow the ways of Jesus. These are Jesus followers. Christians are people who have done something. They've put the trust of their heart, they've put the belief of their life in the person of Jesus Christ and what he did through the cross and the resurrection. So, to simplify, the first Christians were called followers of the way. They were the Jesus people who lived the way that Jesus modeled. You may have even heard them called believers, meaning it's not just people who know about Jesus, it's people who believe in him. And then another term is faith. Faith isn't a term that's only associated with Christianity. You think about a huge roller coaster, you can believe that it was engineered and designed to work, to get you safely from start to finish, hopefully. However, it takes faith to actually decide to ride it. Your faith is shown when you decide to stand in the line, take a seat, and get buckled in. I hate that part, by the way. Now, in the context of church and Christianity, faith is about having trust and confidence in Jesus. Faith is really shown when we live differently and we trust Jesus in a way that shapes how we live. Okay, you get all of that? We got those terms clear? Okay, cool. Now, before we simplify, let's do the opposite. Okay, sometimes Christianity seems a little bit complicated. The Bible is hard to figure out. I'll be the first to admit that. We pray, but we're not sure how to do it. We're not sure what to say. The preacher talks, but we're not sure what they're saying. It seems like the people who are the best at being Christians are the ones who have all the complicated stuff figured out. They know all the deep, fancy, important stuff that we simply do not know. It's almost as if the holy people are complex and the non-holy people are simple. Now, by the way, people can do this in almost every area of life or work. The more complicated you make things, the smarter people think you are. I don't know why, but it just works like that. Plus, Christianity seems like a whole bunch of do's and don'ts. Some of them aren't complex. They're very straightforward, but if you add them all up, it's still a long, complicated list to keep up with. And here are just a few examples. Here's what you should do. Pray, read your Bible, go to church, forgive, be kind, serve other people, worship, be grateful, respect authority, etc., etc. Don't drink, smoke, vape, cheat, lie, steal, gossip, be jealous, listen amigos, anything like that. That's in the don't do it list, okay? Now, one last way that we complicated things. We guard our, Christian image, especially at church. I was so good at this in high school. As a preacher's kid, I knew how to say all the right churchy stuff at church. And it was totally different than who I was at school and with my friends. Now, anytime you're juggling multiple masks at one time in life, it complicates things. Now, here's the good news. We're going to simplify things in this series. Hey, we even made it the title, Simplify, right? And I believe that if you and I can truly grasp what we talk about, it will change everything in our lives in the best way possible. I really, really mean that. Now, to do that, we're going to start by talking about the very reason why Christianity and the church exists. It's Jesus. Now, one of the many reasons why Jesus came was to give us a picture of what God is like. Jesus was literally God in human skin who walked among us. That means, listen, if you want to see what God is like, look at Jesus. Jesus shows us what God is like. That's why the books in the Bible called the Gospels, that's why they are so important. Because the Bible, which is a collection of books, is divided into two parts. You have the Old Testament and the not so Old Testament. We call that the New Testament. The Old Testament is about the story of God before Jesus walked the earth among us. The New Testament is about Jesus on earth and after. The Gospels are 4 accounts of Jesus' life on earth, and that's why they're very, very important. Now, back then, not all people welcomed Jesus. In fact, they eventually had him murdered. Even though Jesus helped, blessed, healed, noticed, and encouraged thousands of people, there were people who didn't like him. First, they didn't like that he claimed to be God. Let's just be honest, you and I. It wouldn't be easy to believe someone who claimed that today. So let's not be too quick to judge people for having a tough time believing it back then, okay? And the second thing was he challenged people's religious views. The churchy people of Jesus' time, back in the day, they followed something called the law. And since they felt confident that this religious law came from God himself, it was highly controversial when anyone challenged it. Again, I think this makes total sense. Because Jesus was so different and difficult for people to figure out, they often struggled to know if he was, a great teacher of the law. Was he someone who was trying to destroy it? So they were constantly asking him questions and trying to get answers or trying to trap him into giving the wrong answers. It's annoying, but hey, you have to respect their passion, okay? Now, what we're looking at today is no different. A very smart religious guy asked Jesus this. He says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Now, in those days, the law was complicated. There were 613 commandments and even more sub-commands. Some were about what to do and some were about what not to do. Look at what he said back to them. Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." So their question wasn't shocking, and neither was Jesus' answer. Nobody was going to argue with the idea that the best thing that you can possibly do is love God as much as you possibly can. The whole love God idea was part of a prayer that Jewish people memorized from the time that they were kids. So nobody was surprised, but Jesus wasn't done. Then he said, "And the second is like it." They're like, "Hold on, wait a minute. We got 2 number 1 commands? It would be like having 2 winners of the Super Bowl. Like, that just does not seem right." But like we said, Jesus was different than what people were used to. So then he continued, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Now, this one, people, was tougher for people to grasp, especially in that culture, which was an every person for themselves society. Jesus' statement was a really big deal, and we'll talk about why throughout this series. See, to us, there's nothing strange about this statement, but to the people who heard it, it changed everything. Okay, then Jesus concluded, "All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments." All the laws, all the sub-laws, all the things the prophets said, the warnings, commands, pleas, and instructions, all the things priests and religious leaders taught about, all the do's and don'ts, all the knowledge, all the religious words. Jesus made faith simple. He took every one of those complicated ideas and he placed them all underneath 2 very simple challenges. Love God and love others. However, just because it's simple, it doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, Jesus knew that narrowing it down to love sounds simple, but it's actually complex and challenging. So let me illustrate this for just a second, okay? Think about this phone, all right? This is my iPhone. It prides itself in being simple. I know 4-year-olds who can navigate it, a 4-year-old who belongs to me, by the way, and I know a lot of grandparents who can use it correctly. But what if I told you to take it apart and put it back together? What if I told you to explain all of the technology to someone else? Like how touchscreens work and with a layer of capacitors that have coordinates to define their position. Some of you are answering me out loud right now and I don't want you to do this. It's just an illustration, okay? What if someone paid you to buy all of the individual components of an iPhone and build one from scratch? That, my friends, is not simple at all. That's complex, and it's actually quite difficult. Love is the same way. Jesus simplified it, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Sure, it's easy to love people who are easy to love. Anybody can do that, but it's difficult to love people who are difficult to love. And loving God, man, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. But how do we actually do that? That's what this series is all about. And that's why Jesus made it so simple, so that people would remember it and hopefully spend their lifetimes trying to do it. So here's what I think we can do throughout this series, okay? I think, first of all, we can keep faith simple, and there's two ways that I think we can do that. Number one is I want us to focus on love. Over the next few weeks, we'll talk about how to live it out together, but for now, just keep it at two simple ideas in your mind. Love God and love others. Don't overthink it. Love God and love others. And then I want you to memorize this phrase from the verse. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. So what we did is we tried to make this really easy for everyone. You're gonna get a QR code, and it will take you to a set of daily devotionals built just for this series. Plus, once a week, you'll get a few ideas of how to memorize this specific verse. So we want you to do that. These are literally the words that Jesus said were the most important. So let's make it important to us as well, okay? Yes, say yes. Now, imagine if being a Christian was no longer so confusing, no longer so complicated or overwhelming. What if you had confidence because you knew what was most important to God? You do. If you want to know more about who God is, look to Jesus. And Jesus said the best thing, the absolute best thing that you can focus on is loving God and loving others. Keep faith simple. And look, I get it. It doesn't mean that love will be simple or it'll be easy, but it does mean that you can know with confidence that love is the absolute most important thing to God. Okay, now, one more thing before you go. When you head to groups, I want you to think about how you would answer this question. What parts of faith seem complicated to you? Okay, what parts of faith seem complicated to you? I'd love for you to talk about it. I love you. I'm proud of you, and I'll see you the next part of this series. Peace.